Hello everybody, I just wanted to do a check-in for this week, and I actually wanted to talk about a few of the questions that have been popping up on my YouTube channel. And I'll probably post this video there at some point, but because you're in the group, you get it live. So, one of the questions that popped up was on the video on 6 signs of the anxious avoidant trap. And I'll just read the question for you. So you said that the feeling of being trapped comes from the fact that inwardly one knows that the relationship isn't good, but at the same time it seems impossible to put an end to it because of the activating strategies. This is for an anxiously attached person. So if I, the anxious partner, constantly doubt about the validity of my relationship, does it mean that my doubts are real? And the only thing that keeps me from ending the relationship is my attachment and insecurity. Or am I just being obsessive? I'm feeling very upset right now because of this. It's like you made my biggest fear so real and actual. Okay. So if I, the anxious partner, constantly doubt about the validity of my relationship, does it mean my doubts are real? If you're having doubts, they are real. I mean, that's what is real, what is not real. Whatever your experience of anything is real, and you have every right to that experience. It's not, the idea that you could be having something that is not real. That's kind of like what's called an introject, right? Like someone somewhere along the lines told you, oh, you're being silly, or you're just making this up, or whatever. And so the more we hear that message, the more we split ourselves off from our own inner knowing. And I feel like individuals who are anxious tend to be maybe a little more empathic anyway, like they pick up on things, and sometimes they pick up on things that other people are not ready and or willing to acknowledge themselves, or are not consciously aware of themselves. And so they say, no, that's not true, when you may be, sensorially picking up on something that they just don't recognize in themselves, right? So there's a couple of layers there. But if you feel like you're having doubts, that's evidence of something. It's evidence of, a contrast you may have within yourself. It's evidence of a conflict that you're experiencing. It's something that the insides are not matching up with the outsides, okay? And the more in touch we are with our insides, the more we're able to kind of modulate how that impacts our relationships. So, for example, your body is kind of a radio dial for what I will call your spirit, your soul, your essence, your inner being. Okay, so if you're starting to feel anxious and tearful and upset about something, then usually what's happening is your thought processes or whatever it is you're thinking or perceiving is somehow out of sync with what your inner experience is. And so typically your inner experience is not going to be anxious. And what do I mean by that? Well, your soul, your essence is this, immortal, constant ball of light, love, and compassion, and it knows that you are a perfect being just as you are. Okay. Now, when you start to have those cyclical negative thoughts, that is out of congruence with that truth, that essential premise, right? So the more you start to doubt yourself, the more you start, am I real? What am I experiencing real? Are my feelings even real? You're moving further and further away from being sovereign within yourself, okay? And so it's not that your thoughts and your doubts are not real. That contrast, that conflict you're experiencing is very real inside of you. Right? When you start to make assumptions about other people, that's when we have to do what's called a reality check or reality testing, where we take a moment where we stop and we acknowledge the feelings that we're having, and we say, wow, there's some kind of contrast and dissonance that's being created here in this scenario. Like maybe your partner is behaving in such a way that you are starting to feel doubt about yourself, or you're starting to feel doubt about the relationship. Okay, so then if your thoughts are becoming increasingly incongruent with where your heart may be, and your heart is always going to know that it's going to be fine no matter what happens, no matter whether or not you are with this person, no matter whether or not this relationship works out, you will be fine. There's no universal law that if you don't find the one, then the story of your life has gone horribly wrong. Okay? This concept of the one is very early wounding. And this idea keeps us anxious in relationships, and it keeps us clinging to something because we try to make that relationship into the one relationship when every relationship is just a learning process. And in my mind, in my opinion, there's no set rules about this. We have guidelines, more or less, that we meander through, but there's no set rules about that. There's no one person on this earth that is going to fulfill, first of all, that's going to fulfill your every wish, desire, need. That's an omnipotent desire. That's an early childhood thing where you wanted to merge with your mother. That's a fantasy we concoct to try to make up for the things we didn't get in childhood. Okay? That's like expecting a partner to be a mind reader. And then it like goes back to the video about neediness and expecting a partner to already know what you need, and then if they don't say what you want them to say, then that means that, you know, they don't care, or if you ask for them to tell you something you need to hear, then it doesn't count because you had to ask. Right? Because you expect them to read your mind. And if they can't read your mind, then it's not real. Meanwhile, they've been waiting for you to actually express a need so that they can finally meet you where you're at and feel like they've had some kind of connection with you. You expressed a need. Yay, I can fulfill it. Woohoo, I have a role in this relationship. Right? I have something I can contribute to it. Thank you for letting me contribute to it. And then you got to be able to take that in. And we don't know how to take things in. We don't know how to receive, because somewhere along the line we got the message that we had to suit. This is really more of an anxious person's paradigm, but we had to fit what's going on around us in order to get the things that we needed, like love, bonding, sex, affection, that kind of thing. So the second part of this question, and the only thing that keeps me from ending the relationship is my attachment and insecurity, or am I just being obsessive? Well, I can talk about this in terms of energies and chakras, okay? So when we are obsessive, it usually means there's a couple of things. There's the biopsychosocial approach to this. And so the biological approach to this is that when you have obsessive thinking, your anterior cingulate cortex, which is the part of the brain that connects the two halves of the brain, there's an anterior cingulate gyrus, which is kind of like a nodule right here. What happens is it becomes very overactive and you become hyper-focused on something. And messages cannot cross from one side of the brain to the other. So you stop really allowing that information to sort of go on its way. It gets stuck there, like on a loop, and more often than not a negative loop. And what happens is that kind of fires up what Dr. Amen calls a trauma diamond. So you start obsessing, it starts impacting your basal ganglia, which is the part of the brain that often is associated with anxiety, and with your body, like with your idol, like your body's idol. Okay, so your state of comfortability in your body, like if you're feeling anxious or not, or panicky. Then that also jump starts your limbic system, which has to do with mood, food, sleep. Okay, so you lose your appetite, you start feeling depressed, you want to sleep all the time, or you want to eat all the time. Then, you know, all of your emotional memories are tied up in that, all your sensorial memories, all of our attachment neural pathways are also embedded primarily in the limbic system. This is also the part of the brain that is the most stimulated when we are addicted to something. So I'm also probably going to put in the comments the link to my video about roller coaster relationships, but there is a very physical, biological component here. When you are attached to someone, when your attachment pathways are activated, it works on the same parts of the brain that have to do with chemical addiction, because attachment and bonding produce chemicals in the body. For women especially, when they are in a sexual physical relationship, at least in a heterosexual relationship, that the female body, their pH balance and hormones actually adjust to the hormones of the male. So like they've done studies on this, that like her intimate smell actually changes based on her partners. So, you know, there is a very physical and physiological component to being obsessive, okay, and also to being physically attached. When you break up with someone, you go through withdrawals. I'm not even using that word metaphorically. It's literal. You go through chemical withdrawals. Your body goes through chemical withdrawals. Okay. And I feel like when I talk about this, people have this resistance to thinking of themselves as like addicts. you're a drug addict. And I'm not saying that with any form of judgment. It's what it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. Right? Really, there isn't. But it's extremely uncomfortable. And then we have all of our psychological stuff tied up in it, right? And because I personally believe that all addicts, whether they struggle with ingestive or non-ingestive addictions, have attachment stuff. That's my thesis. I wrote a book on it. Okay? I think it's all connected. I also think it's connected to complicated grief. Okay? So, I wrote a book on that. It's called Complicated Grief, Attachment, and Art Therapy, just in case you want to check it out. So it's all connected. So I feel like I say that and people just ho-hum it. It's really true. Take this really seriously. So how, in all the research we've done, in the decades we've been doing research on it, how do people work with addiction? How do they work with it? There's lots of different ways out there, lots of them. The way that I work with it is I work with it through the body, because I believe attachment is a bodily and visceral experience, number one. Number two, I work with it through the framework of the chakras and the energy system, because it just resonates with me, and I'm also a Reiki practitioner and energy healer. So it starts with the body, because the body is the radio dial for spirit, okay? And your mind, your ego, I'm gonna refer to your mind and your ego as interchangeably. This is how we receive consciousness, okay? But consciousness and the body have to have a happy marriage, okay? And when we are stuck in some form of addiction, our energies either escape to the head, and so we get lost in fantasy, in obsessiveness, in withdrawal, okay? Over-intellectualizing, over-rationalizing. We try to figure it out rather than feel our way through, okay? Or we cut off the head, because that's too painful to think about, and we remain sort of stuck in this, getting swamped and overwhelmed by our feelings and our affect states. We just get stuck there. And so we end up acting a lot on impulse and on being compulsive, without feeling like we have much control or authority over how we act and behave, or who we're attracted to, right? Or what we do with our bodies. So I feel like there's kind of two things that happen when it comes to sexuality. Like if we split off and we go to the head, we tend to objectify the body. And so the body becomes kind of like a tool for us to get what we want. The other side of it is we become so embedded in our bodily experiences that we are compelled by them. Okay, so it's not about being like because one of the characteristics of this is that for people who struggle with insecure attachment, whether it's avoidant or anxious, sex becomes kind of split off. It becomes, or it can become, kind of a tool to position yourself in the relationship. And in those moments of intimacy, they can be very poignant, and they can feel very spiritual and very deep. And I'm not saying they're not, but because in that moment you have sort of released the constraints of your insecurity. Okay, sometimes you do, maybe you don't. But on those occasions that you do, it's like a drug. It's like a hit. And then we're like chasing that high, right? We're chasing that high again. So it's kind of split. So in secure relationships, sexual intimacy and emotional intimacy, they're not so split. They're kind of, they're considered one and the same. They're addressed as one and the same. Okay. So feeling upset, you have a right to feel upset, and I think you should let yourself feel it. I don't think you should split it off, because that's just more of the same. The thing about having a feeling, even if it's a difficult one, is if you allow for it, it actually moves through you. But if you really don't want to allow for it, or you're kind of addicted to the misery, because to be honest, sometimes we are addicted to our misery as well. We have these pathways in our brain that tell us that attachment is connected to misery, and because attachment is actually a survival mechanism, it's a behavioral survival mechanism in your brain. If your neural pathways developed in such a way in childhood that you associate misery with love, misery with bonding, misery with survival and attachment, because love and bonding are essential needs, they're not optional. They're not optional. We've done studies that show that babies die when they don't get it. They're fed, all their other needs are met. They're fed, they're clothed, they're sheltered, but if they don't receive love and bonding, they die. Failure to thrive. Okay. So in our primal brain, we associate attachment with survival, especially if we've grown up with this insecure attachment. So for the avoidant, it's so almost like needing to split ourselves off from a certain kind of feeling because the feeling evokes a sense of threat. Okay, it's about survival. For the anxious person, it's a little bit different. It's feeling like I need to get to and cling to and hang on to that thing because if I don't, I won't survive. Okay, so all of that is to say that if you have doubts, they're real. If you have a feeling, it's real. You don't need anyone else or something outside of you to validate that. Your own feelings, okay? If you have if you are wondering about something in the relationship, then you have to ask. You have to ask, and you have to not worry about what the other person is thinking. To some extent, it's not to say that you can't respect and or be curious about what the other person is thinking, because obviously you're going to be, and you're probably obsessing over it anyway. But you have to be able to be sovereign in yourself, to connect with what it is that you do need and want. And if it's not possible with this person, then you have to realize that you are an immortal ball of love and light and compassion, and you can find happiness with someone else. You can. And if you're willing to do the work on yourself, that process goes a lot easier. Okay. So I think that's enough for today. I'll address some of the other ones in another video. Leave me your comments below. I've been getting all kinds of comments. One of the comments, someone called me, what do they call me? Sarcastic, smug, and judgmental. Oh, I suppose this is a sarcastic, smug, and judgmental response to that. But anyway, yes, I'm gonna sign off now. So I'd love to hear your comments, your feedback, how you're taking it in, what your personal experiences of this are, and if you have criticisms, let's hear those too. I don't consider myself an expert in this at all. I'm still figuring it out myself. I just consider myself an explorer. I know how to read, I know how to write, and I know how to reflect on what it is that I'm exploring. And so I really just want to invite people to do that with me. And so that involves conversation, that involves discourse. And so I really appreciate all the comments and all the attention for that, because I think that as we converse, I'm going to quote David Whyte. David Whyte's an Irish poet. He talks about the conversational nature of reality. And so that's really what I feel like we are doing here. We're having a conversation, and as we do so, we are constructing our realities. So thank you for being willing to be a part of the conversation here in this group, and I look forward to hearing your side of this story.